Hey everybody, I'm Jack Reedy with Future Pastimes, and I'm a designer on Dune-themed games and expansions. And in this video, I want to talk a little bit about the Bene Gesserit prediction. Now, they start the game with a set of prediction cards, and there are two types. There are turn cards and there are faction cards. And if we look over here at the sheet, it talks about the prediction. So after step one, after positions on the table have been established, you are going to secretly predict another faction that you think will win. And you're going to be selecting the turn number card and that specific faction. You're going to keep it secret, and you're going to secretly remove the unselected cards from the game. And what's going to happen is if that faction wins the game, either by themselves or with their ally, on the turn that you predicted, then you win instead. You win alone. So let's get into that. Talk a little bit about it, how that works. Now, you are not going to be selecting yourself. Why is there a Bene Gesserit card? It's in there because you can use that as a way of dealing out factions. You can just be like, all right, who is going to play what? If you're not going to be just like, I want to play Harkonnen, and if somebody else is like, well, I want to play him too. This is one of the ways you can do it. Or if everyone is like, I don't care what faction I get, then you can say, yeah, we'll deal these out randomly. So it's handy for that. There may be other uses for these cards down the road, but we'll talk about that when it's appropriate. So yeah, you're going to be looking at these turn cards, choosing one of those, and you're going to be and of course you're not choosing from all of them, just the ones in the game. It wouldn't make sense for you to pick Chom in a game that doesn't have Chom. There's no way they're going to win. So most likely, like if this top row, because the Bene Gesserit are in the game, if they're predicting, you may be like, oh yeah, it's Atreides, Harkonnen, Ikaz, the Ixians, and Spacing Guild, and that's the mix. I'm choosing one of these 5 factions, and I'm choosing a turn. So let's talk about how do you do that? Well, one of the obvious things, of course, is it's going to depend not only on what the other factions are, what the factions, but that mix of factions too. So you might be like, well, yeah, I tend to want to pick the Ixians, but it's really going to depend on who else is in the game with the Ixians, because that might affect their likelihood of winning on any particular point in the game, as well as who's playing them. So, not everybody playing the Ixians is going to do as well as somebody else. So understanding the other players is a big factor. So one of the things you're probably going to want to be thinking about is the early game. So turns 1, 2, or 3. The late game, 8, 9, 10, or the mid game. And so part of that is you're just deciding based on the mix of factions and players how long you think this game is going to go. Now, in a game with the Harkonnen and the Ixians, these are two factions that can win very early. Technically, Atreides can win on turn 1. So can the Spacing Guild. And why is that? That is because Atreides starts on the board in Arrakeen. Harkonnen start on the board in Carthag. Guild starts on the board in Tuix. And of course, the Ixians start on the board in their own hidden mobile stronghold. And then what that means is somebody who already has forces on the map can ship into Carthag, for example, and then move using the ornithopters either into Arrakeen or into Tabor, and that would put them in 3 strongholds. So they could win. Now, I mentioned Harkonnen and Ixians before I really got into Atreides and Spacing Guild, and here's why. Harkonnen have 2 treachery cards that they start the game with that nobody knows what they are. Ixians might know what they might be, but they won't know what they are. And Atreides has no card knowledge on them. And if they buy a card in that first bidding round, they're actually getting 2 cards and another one that most likely nobody knows. Ixians might know if they put that card up there, but that's a big maybe. But the point is they could have 4 cards, which means they have a much better chance of having a weapon or defense, or even both. And so Harkonnen with a weapon and or a defense on turn 1 might feel very lucky, especially considering who their traders are. So that is going to be probably a bigger edge than Atreides will have. But Atreides, again, their starting card is good, and using their card knowledge during bidding, they might be able to pick up another good card, or they'll know, like, ooh, I have a projectile weapon and no shields came up in that bidding round. Now, somebody might have a shield as one of their starting cards, but that might make Atreides be aggressive. And the Ixians, of course, they start the game choosing which card they want out of those that are going to be dealt out. So they might have a really good card, and they'll have the knowledge of its effectiveness. So if there was only going to be one projectile weapon in that initial deal and no shields, they might say, yeah, I'm going to take that weapon. And now I know nobody has a defense. And in that first bidding round, they'll know if a shield is coming up. And if only one comes up, they might put it on the bottom of the deck. And that's a reason why they won't know what that top card is if Harkonnen buys it. So that may be a scenario in which case the Harkonnen buying a card is going to get a card from the top of the deck that neither Atreides nor Ixians knows what it is. So knowing that these factions are in the game, you might decide that a turn 1 or a turn 2, while picking one of these, actually works out pretty well. Now, the turn 1 is a gamble. The game rarely ends on turn 1. It's usually easy enough for everybody to stronghold block to prevent that from happening. So I don't tend to bother with the turn 1. It's a big gamble. But one of the other reasons is that there's no alliances on turn 1. Barring ECAS. Now, I have ECAS up here just for that reason. So that might change something, and I'll explain why here in a second. But with this mix of factions, turn 2 might be a better one. It gives everybody a chance, especially these two factions, which are, again, the most likely to go for an early win. Ixians notoriously are strong at the start of the game, but if they don't win in the first couple of turns, they're going to have a hard time winning later on. And that's just based on statistics. Things will happen, and they might be like, But when factions get into alliances, it makes that prediction a little bit easier, because you may have predicted the Harkonnens, but their alliance with the Ixians is what gives them the win on turn 2 or turn 3 or whatever. And because you predicted the Harkonnens on that turn, you will win. So alliances make the prediction a little bit easier, because now there are fewer people going for the win solo. There's fewer options there. Now, you mentioned the ECAS. Now, they start the game with 5 random ambassadors, but they also start with the Duke Vidal. That's the ECAS ambassador. And Duke Vidal is going to, that ECAS ambassador lets somebody form an alliance. So they could form an alliance on that first turn, which is unusual. Now, Mauritania has another way of getting into alliances outside of the Nexus, but it requires their terror tokens, and they don't get to place those until the end of the turn. So they're not going to be doing any alliances on turn 1. So this is a wild card here. They could say, let's form this alliance. So that may be a reason to go turn 1. Probably wouldn't want to pick ECAS. You're trying to figure out who they would ally with. And again, it's most likely going to be one of these two if you're going for a very, very early win. Now, once we have a different mix, that's going to be something else. So one thing that does throw this off a little bit is the Spacing Guild. They've got their special win condition, which you cannot predict. You can't predict anybody's special win conditions, and that is explained in here right there at the end. You can't predict that the Spacing Guild of Fremen will win through their special victory conditions. That does not apply to ECAS. ECAS has kind of a special win condition as well. If they are allied, and because they can co-occupy a stronghold with their ally, and if they're in 3 strongholds with their allies, they only need those 3 strongholds. Normally, an alliance needs 4 strongholds to win, but with ECAS, they only need 3. But it's hard to do. they're really not, unless they've got a Hajer, they're not going to be able to get into 3 strongholds. They do start on the map, but they start in Imperial Basin, not in a stronghold, so they would have to move. They could ship into one, move into another, but if they have Hajer, then yes, they could move into 2 with their ally, or the faction that they're trying to get into an alliance with. But that's a pretty tall order. There's a lot of ifs on that one. So again, I don't think I would worry about turn 1. Turn 2 or 3, yeah, especially if you're playing advanced. That's because there are going to be 2 spice blows, and so you increase the odds of a nexus happening because you're drawing 2 cards rather than just 1. That would have been no alliance or no nexus on turn 1. There wouldn't be one on turn 1 anyway, but on turn 2. So yeah, let's say that was the turn 1, and then we're like, look at that, a nexus right on turn 2. So a turn 2 alliance. Again, statistically, it's going to be later before you have your first nexus. A lot of players don't like to get into an alliance on turn 2. They feel like it's a little bit dirty. But that's going to go back into not just the factions, but the players. If you're playing Dune with people that you play a lot, then you might have a good understanding of their feelings about a turn 2 alliance. And if they're like, oh yeah, we want to do it, we're going to get into it. We don't want to go 10 turns, especially with the guild in there. Let's do alliances early. Knowing that, then yes, maybe you want to do an early prediction. So maybe turn 2, turn 3. A lot of times an alliance doesn't necessarily want to go for the win the turn that it happens. However, some alliances are formed primarily because of where they are. So you might have Harkonnen, they're in Carthage and they went into Habanya. So they're in 2 strongholds. And the Ixians, maybe they're in, their hidden mobile stronghold, and maybe they go into Tabor. So they're in 2. Then you have that nexus happening. Well, they already are in enough strongholds to win, and they still have another shipping and movement. So they could try to get into all 6 strongholds, or they could just fortify the ones where they're weakest and then fight it out. So that is an alliance that forms, partially because, maybe instead it was, the guild. The Ixians they went after spice. The guild is in Tuix, and then they went into Tabor. So they're in 2, Harkonnen are 2, so maybe they form an alliance. And they say, yeah, we're already in enough strongholds. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Anyway, you see what I mean. That is a lot of times the motivation is they are already set up for the win, and now they just need to bolster. Sometimes it's because they really like each other's alliance abilities. So sometimes, Atreides and a Bene Gesserit are like, we're very formidable with prescience and voice. So that might be great. Ekaz might form up with the Ixians to get some of those ambassador advantages and some card advantages. The Ekaz, they start off with 12 spice and 6 forces on the board, so maybe they save their money till turn 2, and then the Ixians can help them buy a couple of treachery cards, including one that they have placed on the top of the deck, knowing that Ekaz can discard whatever they get and just take that top card. And so, and that will be true of whoever they ally with. But you can probably guess what I mean by that. Now, faction like Moritani and Tleilaxu, these are late game winners. They don't tend to win early. They win later on. Moritani's wearing everybody down with assassination and their terror tokens. The Tleilaxu are getting richer and richer as the game goes on, and maybe they're getting golas out of strong dead leaders. So for them, maybe you want to go, between 6 and 8 for them if they're in the game, because they may act as spoilers in the early part. There may be a face dancer reveal that prevents the win. They may go in there just to shake things up, and people are afraid of a reveal. So the mix of factions is the primary thing, and then your knowledge of what the other players do. The other thing that we'll talk about the prediction is that you don't want to necessarily just treat it as a prediction. You want to treat it as a goal. It's a strategy. You are trying to, if you have predicted Chome on turn 6, you are trying to make the game last until turn 6, first of all. So you may have to get involved in fights and sacrifice forces and or leaders and or treachery cards. If you don't think that you are in a position to win either by yourself or with an ally, you're just trying to hold out to turn 6 to give Chome that edge. Maybe you are allying with Chome to help them out, give them the voice. Or you're getting yourself in a situation where you are coexisting in strongholds with Chome, and then you're flipping at the start of turn 6 so that they have to fight you, but you're planning to lose all those battles, or a battle with Chome, in order to position them to win. And so you want to try to do what you can to get them into that position. Whoever it is that you've predicted, whether it's Chome or the Fremen, or if you're picking the Fremen, I don't know what you're thinking, unless Banana Smasher is in the game, but the Emperor. And the last thing that I will say about prediction is that you can be allied with the faction you have predicted, and help them to win. You're not throwing a battle, whatever. You're doing what you can to help win. Because if you do win on the turn that you picked, and you picked your ally, you win and they do not win. You steal the win from your ally. And that may be the best Bene Gesserit prediction win that I can think of, is predicting your future ally and then stabbing them in the back. What could be more Dune than that? So yeah, I'm not going to go on a breakdown of every configuration and say, here's who you do. Again, just some general highlights. But feel free, if you have thoughts, share those in the comments. How do you try to finagle a prediction? What sort of luck have you had with it? And what were some of the reasons why that happened? Did it have to do with your knowledge of the mix, the players? Was it just blind luck? Did you betray somebody? Did you throw a battle? Did people waste their truth chances on you to ask if it was safe for them to win that turn? Let me know all those things in the comments. It's one of the fun part of the Bene Gesserit, but often overlooked. And a lot of times you just feel like, well, it's just going to be pure luck if it happens. Not necessarily. It is a stretch. It's an unusual win. It's not a common way to win the game, but it is really juicy when it does happen. So that's it for this one, everyone. Thanks for watching, and I will see you again soon.